Hey, I'm Colin with ECS Tuning, and today we're going to be replacing two of the biggest failure points on the BMW B58 engine. Right here in front of me, we have a water pump and we have a thermostat housing. If you're leaking coolant from your B58, it's probably from one of these guys. So we'll get them replaced and hopefully fix this BMW's biggest issue. To complete this job, here are some of the tools you're going to need laid out in front of me. So we have a T20 socket, a T30 socket, various 3/8 and 1/4 inch sockets, deep, short. We have a 3/8 and a 1/4 inch ratchet. Power tools aren't necessary for this job, but it does help. We're going to need a general pick set for getting off clamps and electrical connectors, trim removal tools, a 1/4 inch and 3/8 torque wrench. We're also going to be using a coolant bleed tool as well as a coolant pressure tester for when we get everything back together. And that should conclude the tools that you're going to need for this install. So step one in this process is going to be disconnecting the battery. So we grab a 10mm and we can disconnect that really quick. Next, we're removing our intake. This car doesn't have a stock intake. This is actually an aftermarket intake. So procedure won't be exactly the same, but get that removed and get it out of the way. Next, we're going to remove our clean air pipe. So this is basically just a turbo inlet. You have two PCV connections, one here and one here. This one has an aftermarket billet inlet, so this might be a little bit different for you, but basically the same procedure applies. Colin's 2025 petition. Get auto manufacturers to stop making this type of PCV connector because they suck. Okay. Now we can access this guy. There we go. Next, we're going to remove our fan shroud. So we're going to unplug the fans right here at the bottom. Remove this, and then we have a T25 Torx, and then we should be able to just pull the fan out. This car is equipped with an aftermarket charge pipe. If you have an OEM charge pipe, it should be pancaked enough to just remove the fan shroud without removing it. But in this case, our fan shroud appears to be hitting this charge pipe, so we're going to pull that as well. Remember when removing some of these BMW connectors that you're gentle with a pry tool, because you don't want to snap this connector off and then have to repin something. That is never a good time. Next, we'll grab an 11mm ratchet wrench for our T-bolt. Like mentioned before, if you have a stock charge pipe, you're not going to have this. Next, we'll grab a T30 and remove these bolts for the charge pipe that are on the throttle body. Now I'm going to pull this charge pipe off. Now that our charge pipe is removed, we should be able to remove our fan shroud. So grab my flathead screwdriver, come back over here, pry this tab out of the way like before. I'm also going to pull off this section of the charge pipe as well, just so we don't drop something down inside of this and then maybe you forget about it. You don't want to start your car with something in the charge pipe. That's not good. So we'll remove this as well. Next step is going to be removing the under tray so we can drain the coolant. A lift isn't required for this, obviously, but it makes it a lot easier when we can lift the car in the air. So we're also going to drain the coolant while we're down there. So we're going to crack open our reservoir so we can get it to drain a little bit faster. And we'll also crack our secondary reservoir here too, because we're going to be draining pretty much the entire system. So let's get underneath the car. Next, we're going to remove the splash shield. So this car actually has a wonderful Turner Motorsport skid plate. So the hardware is going to be a little bit different. We have a bunch of aftermarket Allens here. So we'll get this removed and get our cooling system drained. As mentioned before, this has a bunch of button head bolts, and they are a 5mm Allen. So get all these broken loose here. Now what is factory about these skid plates are all of these 8mm fasteners. So we got a bunch of these all the way around the perimeter of the skid plate. Now that we have our splash tray removed, we can remove this coolant hose from the radiator. So it's just a normal clip style, like a lot of the other radiator hoses on this car. So we're going to pry upwards with a pick tool. So now we'll remove our coolant hose. These can be kind of hard to remove if they haven't been removed in a long time. Oh, are you getting this, cameraman? Okay, that's good. That's good. Now that we've expertly drained our cooling system without spilling a single drop, we're gonna lower the car down and remove our alternator belt. Next up, we're gonna grab our 16mm socket, and we're gonna come in here and grab this tensioner like so. We're gonna turn it clockwise and relieve the tension on this belt. We pull this belt off of our alternator here and let the tension go, just like that. So it's important when you take off a serpentine belt to remember the direction that the belt came off. So in this case, I just put an arrow on it so I know which direction it's spinning. This may not indicate the way it's actually spinning, but it lets me remember which way the belt came off. So it's important because if you put a belt on backwards that's used, you can risk shredding the belt and cause a bunch of unwanted issues. Then you have to take all this stuff apart again. So mark your belts if you're reusing them. If not, and you're putting a new one on, it doesn't really matter. Next up, we're gonna grab our T30 and we're gonna remove all of the bolts for the water pump housing. So there's one here, one here, one here, one here, and then there's one tucked behind the pulley here. They're all relatively accessible, so let's get this thing ripped off. These all loose. These guys out of here. Now that we've removed all of our bolts for our water pump, it is important to note that when you do pull this off, you're probably gonna lose more coolant. So make sure you have some type of drip tray underneath of the vehicle to catch all that coolant so you don't spill a drop like we didn't. Now, this can be a little bit on there if it's been on as long as it's been on this car. So if you have kind of a higher mileage, you might need to pry up here carefully. And we should be able to pry a little bit more and pull this guy off of here. I'll just let our coolant drain for a second. There we go. There it is. It appears that there's some kind of alignment dowels here and here that you need to be careful of when you remove. You have to basically just pull it straight off after you're done prying because we don't want to damage these dowels. So up close, we can actually show you some of the failure here. So this gasket, over time, it's just the nature of a rubber gasket. They kind of turn into plastic and break down. So you can see this one is really hard to remove. It also feels like it's not even rubber anymore. So I also noticed while I was playing around with this that there's a little bit of play in this pulley here. So if you're getting excessive pulley noise or anything like that, that could also be part of it too. So here's our new gasket. As you can see, it's a lot more pliable than the one that was on that water pump housing. And there's no play in this pulley here. So we can get this guy thrown on and should not have any more issues in the future. Now we have our debatably most important step, and that is going to be cleaning the mating surface. So as you can see, we have remnants of the old gasket all the way around. That's going to create an improper seal once we put our new water pump on, and the last thing you want when you put a new water pump on is to have it leak, and then you have to redo all the work you just did. So let's get that cleaned up. I'm going to stick some rags in here so we don't get any debris inside of the housing from cleaning this gasket off. Now we'll take our safety razor blade here, and we're just going to scrape gently along the surface to clean off the old gasket, just like that. Now that we have our gasket mating surface clean, we can throw on our new water pump housing. It's very important to double check after you've cleaned everything to make sure that all the foreign debris is out of the housing. And that goes for this too, in case maybe you dropped it or got some dust in it. Just make sure everything's clean before it goes back together. So we're gonna make sure we line this up with our dowels here. And just push it straight on. So the water pump can be kind of tricky to line up with the factory dowels that are on the block. So just make sure you insert the water pump housing straight on, visually inspect to see around the outside to see if it's sealed all the way. That's just so when we thread the bolts in, we don't mushroom one of those dowels and create an even bigger issue. Now that we have our water pump housing thrown on, we're going to be torquing it to 19 Newton meters. It's very important to not go over that spec because these are really tiny bolts going into an aluminum block. So BMW recommends that we tighten this bolt and this bolt first, and then we do these 3 second. So we're going to do it in that exact order. So make sure we have our direction here on our belt. Also going to want to make sure that you clean off any fluid from removing the water pump housing off of the pulleys, because you could get a belt squeak when you start the car back up. And that's annoying, and nobody wants that. All right, now that we're in all of our grooves here, we can grab our ratchet, get back on here, it's the other way. Relieve tension on our tensioner. Throw this back over top of our alternator pulley here. There we go. Now we'll make sure that we're in the grooves on our crank pulley, our AC compressor. Looks good, so we'll let off the tension. And there we go. Serpentine belt is reinstalled just how we found it. Next, we're going to uninstall our rain tray. This is just a 10 millimeter, and there is 3 of these twist type fasteners. So only got to twist them just a little bit until they stop. You don't want to force them because they will break. There we go. Same thing on this side. Going to be some 10 millimeters. Unclip these, and there's a little grommet on this side here too. So just pull up and out just like that. Next, we're going to remove these little dust covers here. So just press it in, pull it out this way, and that's going to expose our 2 bolts for this upper tie bar here. So now we'll grab our 16 millimeter and loosen these 2 bolts. They are a little tight. Now we will grab our E18 Torx and remove this E-Torx bolt on the strut tower. Next, we're going to remove our weather stripping here for the hood seal. So we're going to pull this wire all the way out like this, and we're going to grab our molding and just pull it off. Now we'll remove our cross brace. Next, we'll grab our 10 millimeter and we're going to remove these 6 screws all around the top of this sound deadening or sound insulation panel here, whatever they call it. Let's get this removed. Now we'll remove our sound deadening panel. Now we can remove this little push rivet here. So I just have a pretty standard trim removal tool. Gently pry this guy off of here. And there we go. Now we'll remove this acoustic sound deadening panel. Just pull it upwards. Try not to rip it in half. Next, we're going to remove this lower coolant hose. It's going to be this one right here below this. So get on here with a pick, pry down on this tab, and then we're just going to pull the hose out. It might be a little tough. You might have to wiggle it and pull at the same time. Be prepared once it comes off. Coolant will go everywhere. So now we can just let that drain. So before we progress any further into this uninstallation, I'm gonna go in with compressed air and just blow everything off around the intake manifold. This is because dirt can fall into your intake runners and down in your engine, and you don't want dirt in your engine. Who wants that? So we're gonna blow this off, get all this out of here, and then we can proceed with our uninstallation. Next up, we're gonna remove the cover for the DME. So let's pull this connector off here, pull up some push clips, and our cover's off. So now we're gonna be removing the DME and the PDM from this car. So they're located over here on the strut tower. It's very important that when you're removing this, you don't do it immediately after you disconnect the battery. You want all the, whatever juices are in the system to drain out of it before you touch it, because you can risk bricking both of those components, and you do not want that. So before we start disconnecting stuff, we're just gonna touch something metal so we can ground ourselves, and we should be able to just start unplugging stuff. So now we can start pulling these out. So if you'll notice on the connectors here, you have different colors that label where they go. So that'll just, you know, it's a good reminder for when you unplug these where they go. If you want to take a picture of this before you start. So we have a black one here, gray one here, blue one here, and a yellow one on the back. So makes it so you won't mix any of these up when you reinstall them. So pull all these guys out. So now that we have those pulled out, we can move some of our wires out of the way here. I think we'll also unplug these guys here. Okay. Those disconnected. Fish these out of here like so. And also taking pictures at this step is important, again, as mentioned, so you can reference how these wires are routed and tucked once you're done. So carefully remove our PDM from the slot. And we're just gonna set this over here for now. So this is actually a bag that we ship ECUs to for customers here when they order a tune from us. I'm actually gonna put the PDM and the DME inside of these bags just to minimize any risks we have of electric shock on these. Not so much them shocking me, but I don't want to introduce any static to them. Now I'm going to remove all these connectors. So there's a little push clip here, push this down, pull this towards us, and then remove it like that. And these are all also color coded too, like I mentioned before. So we have black here, gray, blue, green, yellow, and kind of an orange cream color. So we're going to touch the chassis again, make sure we're grounded per se. And we're going to release these two tabs here and pull upwards at the same time. Like so. And then we're just going to go straight into one of our bags that I mentioned earlier. Now that we have our PDM and our DME removed, we can remove the carrier for that. So right here, you'll see there's two 8mm bolts. There's one here and one here, and there's a clip for this wire loom. So let's get those removed and we can get our carrier out for those things because it's in the way. Now that we have this guy unbolted, we can reach under here. There's a little tab you press in on the bottom, and then you can release this wire loom. And there's another push clip here for another wire loom. So we'll disconnect that with a trim tool or a flathead. And we have this wire loom clip back here. Same thing as the one in the front. Just push down a tab underneath and it releases. So we have one more wire loom clip back here. So to reach way down, unclip it from the bottom like that. It's a similar style to this one up front. So now we're going to remove this clip. We'll just pry on this tab gently, pull this up out of the way. So we have a fuel line here. We're just going to remove this out of the carrier as well. It's just some tabs that you have to push out of the way. All right, now we have our fuel line released from the rear. We can shimmy all this spaghetti nonsense over out of the way, and we should be able to pull this up out of its home, like so. And then we can remove these two clips and we should have our tray out. So now we're gonna remove this part of the wiring loom here. It's similar to this connector where you have to push to the side and pry gently because it has a little clip tab on the bottom. So you actually need to have 4 hands to do this. So now that we've finally removed this, I actually had to have a hand from our editor here because it required 4 hands to do. This is now removed. Turns out removing a tray is actually harder than removing the intake manifold. So this is out of the way. Now we can remove the manifold. Now that we have our holder for our DME and our PDM out of the way, we can move all of these wires out of the way. So I'm just going to start tucking wires back here so we have access to things. Something like that. Then we're going to unbolt this from the intake manifold and this PCV line, and then we should be able to move this out of the way too. So like I mentioned before, we're going to remove this PCV line here. We're also going to be removing this entire purge valve assembly off the top of the manifold, and then after that we should have access to these bolts on top, a couple of other little things on the back, and we should be able to pull the manifold off. Grab our T20 Torx. And this should be able to just be released. Just like that. We'll unclip it from here. Bend this out of the way for now. Grab our T20 again and remove this wiring harness. So now we'll pull this out of the way, and I'm just going to tuck it down in front of the engine here. Now I'm going to unclip this other wire loom here. So there's these 2 little tabs. You're just going to pull them towards you, lift up, get that out of the way. Now we have access to our purge valve. So I'm not going to remove this because these break really easily. So I'm just going to minimize the damage and just remove this one off of here. So standard PCV connection, just pull these 2 in and then pull out, and we'll remove it off of this clip. And we're just going to bend this out of the way as well. So now we have 1 connector, and we should be able to release the PCV purge valve this way. So all we're going to do is pull up. We're going to remove this from this hook backwards once we pull up all the way, and then we should be able to release these 2 connections. All right, now we lift up, pull back like this. Now this is released, and we can press these 2 tabs in while pressing in on the purge valve, and then it should release. Now we can grab another pick. We're going to pry up on this tab and release this coolant line. We already drained the system, so we shouldn't have any dripping out of this, but just in case, I'm going to aim it down this way. Now we're going to gently pry on this and remove this sensor as well. Off. Okay, there we go. So now we're going to slightly loosen the bolts for our intake manifold. So there's actually a procedure to do this, kind of like a sequence that you have to take them off. So basically you're just going to start from the outside and go in. So we'll start with 7 first, do 6, then 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So I'm going to remove this clip for the wiring loom back here on the valve cover, just to have a slightly easier access to this bolt at the rear of the manifold. There we go. And now we have access to that rear bolt. So also going to remove this clip here and swing these wires out of the way so we can have access to this rearmost bolt on our manifold. So gently move this out of the way so we don't break it. And these bolts are a 10 millimeter. So start with loosening bolt number 7. We're not fully removing it, we're just loosening it for now. Now we can start with number 6. Number 5. Number 4. Number 3. Number 2. And number 1. Okay. Next, we're going to unclip the wiring loom from this lower connector here. Next up, we're going to remove these 2 coolant hoses from the bottom of the manifold. You might have a little bit of excess coolant coming out of this even if you did drain the system, so just make sure it doesn't go into the intake manifold or the runners. Now we're going to remove these two E10 E-Torques from the brackets here that hold the manifold on, and then we should be able to access these lower coolant hoses. Now we can remove our clip for these coolant hoses down here. Okay, we got one. So now we've removed one of them. These have probably never been off before, so they might be a little bit hard to remove. So just be prepared for that. I definitely didn't cut my thumb open just now. So I'm actually struggling to remove this coolant hose underneath the manifold because it's so close to this bracket. So I'm just gonna remove it from here instead because it's a lot more accessible. Basically the same thing, it's the same line, it's a straight shot. So just gonna remove that instead of that one under there. So like always, we will get our clip here, pry upwards like that, and then we should be able to twist and pull that hose off. Next up, we're going to unplug our throttle body. Simple connector like the rest of the BMW ones on this car. Should be able to just pry it and remove it. So just pry up on this, just like the rest of them. There we go. Now it's time to finally pull our intake manifold. So as mentioned before, it's the 7 bolts on top. We released these 2 bracket bolts, got the coolant lines off, got the throttle body connector off. So as you can see, it's definitely slackened. We're gonna pull this PCV hose off, and that should be the last thing in the way to pull the manifold. So I'm gonna unthread these all by hand. You could probably just buzz all these out with an impact, but this is how I'm gonna do it. And again, at this step, it's crucial to make sure that there's no debris or anything like that sitting right on top of the runners here, because sorry, I shouldn't curse. That stuff is gonna go right down into the head, and you do not want that. So make sure you blow it off with compressed air. You can even use like a leaf blower or anything like that that moves air. The moment of triumph. Removing the B58 intake manifold. So because we removed this coolant hose down here, it might take a little extra finagling to get it out. Now it's out of the way. Oh, and here we have our B58 intake manifold. Finally. So now that we have our intake plenum removed, we can finally inspect our intake runners. So, and our valves and all that stuff. So get a flashlight, look down in there, just check the overall state of them. If you have the means, this is the perfect time to have a carbon cleaning done because you're already this far in. In this case, we're just gonna shove some rags into there for now so no debris gets dropped in there, no bolts or anything like that. Also, don't forget these when you put your intake plenum back on, because that would suck. So now we can remove our thermostat housing. So we have this hose we need to remove here, this connector. We'll probably unclip this hose just to get it out of the way. And that should be all. So let's get it removed. So first step, I'm just gonna remove this little coolant hose here so it's out of the way for clarity purposes. You might not have to remove this on your car. There we go, tuck that out of the way. So we're gonna be removing this lower coolant hose here, and we're gonna be disconnecting this clamp from this coolant hose here, and this connector. All right, so we're gonna pry up on this clip right here, just like the rest of the coolant hoses, and get this up out of the way. Now we should be able to just pull this guy off. You might still be losing a little bit of coolant, so make sure your drain tray is underneath. Now we can gently pry off this connector, like so. There we go. And we're also going to remove this coolant hose right here. So again, just like the rest of them, pry up on this little tab here. Okay, we'll find that later. And then we're just going to pull towards us. Again, make sure your drip tray is underneath. So if you've ever removed this style of spring clamp here with a pair of pliers, you know it can kind of be a pain in the butt. So here we have this Schwaben spring clamp removal tool. So it actually just clips onto the spring clamp here, then you pull it like this, it draws the spring clamp in, and it actually locks with this mechanism here. So it should be a lot easier than a pair of pliers. So let's get them off. And I'm actually gonna come in with a little bit of silicone lubricant and just spray down where this hose clamp is. That will help it slide off of the hose a little bit easier and just make this an overall easier process. So in here with our tool, squeeze, clamp together, and we'll just rotate this off. Our silicone lubricant will break it free just like that, and we can get this hose clamp out of the way. So now we can grab our hose, twist it to break it free, and pull up. Now that's out of the way, and we have access to our housing. So now we can grab our E10 Torx, and we can remove these 3 bolts for our housing. So there's one hidden underneath, and then there's these 2 on top. So if you're just replacing the thermostat, you would remove all of these T20 Torx bolts and then remove this housing. But since we're replacing the whole thing, these 3 E-Torx. Crack these open. So we're just gonna unbolt these the rest of the way by hand. As BMW states, slacken the bolts. So when we finally release this from the block, we're gonna lose a little bit of coolant. So we'll just wait for that to drain all the way, then we can pull it out. It appears we have removed our thermostat housing. Now it can be a little tight to get out of here, but with the right amount of finagling and persuasion, we should be able to just pull it straight out now. Yes. Gross, dirty thermostat housing. So here we have our thermostat housing removed off the car. This is our new one, this is our old one. So we'll go over a couple of the failure points really quick on these. As parts get older, the O-rings and seals will break down over time. These ones don't appear to be doing too bad, but they are starting to turn a little bit harder. So you can tell these are definitely more rubberized. Also, this is a plastic housing, so this is gonna crack over time and fail, and you'll have leaks around mainly this right here for the thermostat. So I'm gonna replace it with this new fresh Johnny. This one shouldn't have any leaks and honestly should last the rest of the life of the car. So let's get this thrown on. So another thing when you're doing this in-depth of an install on something is to inspect your other cooling system components. So these cars obviously use a lot of plastic cooling components. So we noticed that this flange down here is looking pretty rough. That's one bad day away from probably exploding. So we don't want to put our manifold and everything back on and then a month later that cracks and we have to take everything apart again. So if you have a B58 with around 60 to 80,000 miles and you're doing all this, you should probably replace this elbow as well. So we're gonna throw this on and hopefully not have any coolant leaks once we put it back together. Now that we've installed our new coolant elbow, we're gonna make sure that all of our mating surfaces are clean for our thermostat housing, and now we're ready to reinstall. So before we install this fully, we're gonna make sure that our O-rings and gaskets are all seated nicely in the grooves that they're supposed to be in so we don't have any leaks once we go to torque it. So before we throw this back in, one last thing. I'm gonna lubricate this O-ring here just to make it a little bit easier to install. Also, if you're inserting a dry O-ring into some type of metal orifice, you might rip the O-ring, so it's always a good idea to lubricate them before you install them. So now we can get this in. So if you remember from uninstallation, it was a little tricky to get this out of here with the oil filter housing installed. So I'm just gonna hook it underneath of that coolant hose there, line it up with the bracket here for the alternator because it goes into that orifice down there. And then once that's lined up, we can gently press, click it into place just like so. Then we can start our bolts. So now we can go on to torquing our bolts now that our thermostat housing is installed. So we're gonna be torquing these to 8 Newton meters and we're gonna start on this upper bolt here. Okay, now we'll torque this one here. Okay, and now we can do our lower bolt, which is a little bit hard to see eventually. There we go. Okay, now we'll go over them one more time, make sure they're all torqued and seated. Now that we have our thermostat housing torqued, it's time to reinstall all of our coolant lines and all of our connectors that we removed during the first process. So we're gonna make sure that all of our coolant hoses have this little clip inserted in them. Just double check all of them, it's a good rule of thumb, so when we go to pressure test the system, we don't have any blowouts. So once we get these all reinstalled, we can then put on our intake manifold. So now once we have our cooling system buttoned up, we're gonna reinstall our intake manifold, but not fully reinstall it. So what I'm gonna do is we're gonna reconnect these two bottom coolant lines here, and we're also gonna reconnect this top coolant line here. And then we're gonna pressure test our system. So before we do any further reassembly, we're gonna pressure test, make sure we don't have any leaks, because I don't wanna take this apart again, and I'm sure you won't want to either. So let's hook up these coolant hoses and do a pressure test. So we're just gonna slightly set this guy back down here. Going to attempt to reconnect our feed and return coolant lines. So I was pumping this up, I got it up to about 5 bar, and then I noticed we had a leak. So it sounds like it's one of our coolant hoses on our thermostat housing, so we should be able to just replace that O-ring, put it back together, then we'll pressure test it again, and we should be good to go. So 5 bar again, and if we grab this lower hose down here, so if this hose is bent, you can hear it's leaking all the pressure out. So we'll just have to disconnect everything and replace that. Shouldn't be too hard. So now, as always, we're gonna be cleaning our mating surface for our intake manifold. This is just gonna be wiping some dirt and excess oil off. Then we'll replace the O-rings on our manifold, and then we can throw everything back together. So I'm gonna keep these rags in so nothing falls in here, and I'm just gonna give these a quick wipe down. You can also visually inspect these to see if there's any dirt encroaching onto where the O-ring sits. These look mostly clean. So just get all these wiped off, and then we can throw our plenum on. Ew. See, that's why we clean it. There's a bunch of stuff on this one. Now that we've removed our protective rags, we can double check our runners here just to make sure that no dirt or debris fell down into our valves. And everything looks good. So let's swap out these gaskets and throw this plenum on. So now we will remove our intake plenum gaskets. So you can see how bent this one is. This is kind of why we replace them. It's not super critical, but we're here, we might as well. So put these over top, roughly make sure that they're basically the same size before we take these off and potentially ruin them. So I'm just gonna get a pick. Now we're just gonna press these in, just like that. All right, cool. So we have our plenum gaskets installed. Now we can change our throttle body gasket over here real quick. And then we can throw this all back together. Wow. Expertly handled. Wow. Now it's time to install our intake plenum. So we're just gonna feed this in kind of up here because we left this coolant line attached. Feed this back down where it came from. Line this up with the holes. This hose is already clicked in. Pull this forward and reinsert it onto here. There we go. You can reinstall this coolant line that's underneath right here. There we go. And we'll reinstall this one while we're here. Cool. So now we have our intake plenum reinstalled. Now we can start tightening the bolts. So there's 2 torque sequences to this. We're gonna cinch everything down to 5 Newton meters, and then we're gonna move up to 10 Newton meters, and we're gonna follow the observed torque pattern for both of those. So we're gonna come in here. We're gonna start on bolt number 1. Run this down till it's hand tight. Move to bolt number 3. Bolt number 4, bolt number 5, bolt number 6, and bolt number 7 all the way at the back. Now we can begin our final torque sequence. So just like last time, we're going to start on bolt number 1 here, and we're going to be torquing that to 10 Newton meters. Okay, 10 newton meters. We move to bolt number 2, 10 newton meters. Bolt number 3. Bolt number 4, if I can get on it. Bolt number 5. And bolt number 6. And bolt number 7. Cool, and now we'll go back over them in that same sequence to make sure they're all tight. Okay, so now that we've finished torquing our intake manifold, now we can start clipping on all the various brackets, lines, wires, hooking up some PCV connections. Basically just the reverse of uninstallation. So it should be pretty straightforward from here. Now we're finally back to the stage of reinstalling our DME and our PDM. So I've already taken the liberty to reinstall the bracket, the DME, and the PDM. Just like last time, just be careful, touch something metal, make sure you don't shock any of them. And this is where your pictures are going to come in handy. So as you can see here, we have quite the spaghetti warehouse mess. Pictures are going to go a long way, making sure that all these plugs get back to where they need to go. Most of them are shaped to where they can only go in a certain spot, but it's nice to have a reminder of how all the wiring was and how it was routed. B58 cars use a it's kind of basically like a radiator that's inside of the intake manifold. So you have a feed and a return coolant line, and that's what this reservoir is in charge of. So once we connect all of our lines back to our intake plenum, you should probably pressure test this reservoir as well, just to make sure that you have no leaks anywhere. Because once you reinstall this DME, it's going to be almost impossible to get those lines back off without removing that. So we pressure tested it. It's been holding pressure for a couple minutes now, so I think it's good to reassemble the rest of the car. Now that we've buttoned up our engine bay and gotten everything back together, it's time to fill our cooling system. So this car has 2 reservoirs. There's a high pressure reservoir and a low pressure reservoir. We're going to be filling both of these before we start our coolant bleed procedure. When we do start the procedure in the car, these do bleed concurrently with the auxiliary coolant pump, so we need to make sure that both of these are full so we don't risk damaging the coolant pump. While our fill procedure is happening, it is important to note that our fan will kick on sporadically throughout the procedure. It does take about 15 minutes to complete, so we're also going to be reconnecting a buzz box to this battery so we don't kill the car. Now it's time for our vacuum fill procedure. We're using our Schwaben vacuum fill tool here. BMW does recommend that you vacuum fill these systems because there's a lot of places air can hide in the system, and if you don't vacuum bleed them, you could risk overheating your car or having air bubbles. So we're also going to be using OEM BMW coolant. BMW also recommends that you do that. This is a 2018, so we're going to be using G42 coolant. There is a different one after 2018. Just make sure whatever coolant comes out, you put that same color back in, because the new one is green, this one uses blue, G42. If you're curious how to use this tool, I did a very detailed breakdown in our mini B46 oil cooler housing video on how exactly to use this tool. The same procedure applies. Now that we're completed with filling our high pressure cooling system, we're going to move over to our low pressure cooling system. Same procedure as filling the high pressure. We'll just use the vacuum fill tool and then run the procedure through the car to do both once we're completed with the filling. Now we're going to connect our battery tender. While we bleed the auxiliary coolant pump, this will take a while. Like I mentioned before, it takes about 15 minutes. So just so we don't kill the battery, we're going to connect this. Now it's time to start our auxiliary coolant pump bleeding procedure. So to start, we're going to switch the ignition on by pressing the ignition button 3 times quickly. We are going to set the maximum temperature of the blower on our heating system here. So turn this up all the way, and we're going to set the fan to the lowest possible setting. We're also going to be switching on our low beam headlights. After we've done all those things, we're going to press our accelerator to the floor and hold it for 15 seconds. After that 15 seconds is up, we'll hear our auxiliary coolant pump kick on, and we can let it go through the procedure of bleeding itself. While this procedure is running, we're going to open the cap on our low pressure cooling system, and we're going to see if the coolant level is dropping. We're going to keep an eye on this while this procedure runs. As it's dropping, we're going to top up coolant as necessary. Now we're going to continue with the bleed procedure of our high temperature cooling system. So same as the last procedure, we're going to press the ignition 3 times, make sure the low beams are on, make sure our heat is turned up all the way and at the lowest fan setting. And now I'm going to hold the accelerator down for 15 seconds for the last time. Now after we completed that, we're going to start our engine. At first, the idle speed is going to jump up to 1200 RPM. And then once it does that and we wait a couple seconds, I will show you the rest of the procedure following that. Okay, idle is at 1200 RPM. Now we're going to increase the idle speed to 3500 RPM, and we're going to hold that for 10 seconds. Now we're going to let it return to idle speed, and we are going to wait 30 seconds. And now you're going to repeat this procedure 5 times. So that concludes our water pump and thermostat housing DIY. Obviously it is a little bit of an in-depth install, so hopefully we were able to clear up some confusion and help you install these parts on your car. Thank you for watching. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe for more enthusiast content.